We all make choices in life that will affect our futures. Some are good and some are bad. The process of making and living with choices is an integral part of the transition from childhood to adolescence to adulthood. Fortunately, most of these choices are routine and consistent from one generation to the next. However, every now and then we find ourselves faced with a decision whose repercussions will resonate throughout our lives. Or so we hope. Vanya Perlis was one such young man whose life was full of tough choices. Some were his to make on his own, while others were far beyond his control. Facing the stigma of being an orphan child, as well as the woes of depression, Vanya's introduction to adulthood was rocky, to say the least. By 2016, his life had reached the point of turmoil. And tragically, his next few choices in life may well have ended his own.
Ivan Dickinson Perlis, known to his friends and family as Vanya, was born in Russia on October 3, 1991. As children, he and his sister Katie were abandoned by their birth parents and spent the first 8 years of their lives in a Russian orphanage. When Vanya was 8 years old, he and Katie were adopted by Professor Don Perlis and his wife Jean. By all accounts, both Vanya and Katie were fun-loving children who seemed to thrive in their new home. Yet, even from a young age, Vanya seemed to suffer from an ever-present fear of being alone. Later in life, he reportedly stated that he never truly felt comfortable or loved without condition. During his teenage years, Vanya, like many others his age, developed a rebellious streak. He would often stay out long past his curfew and began experimenting with drugs. Vanya's parents' efforts to discipline him, including professional counseling, came to naught. Vanya was later enrolled in a special program in West Virginia to help him get his life back on the rails. Vanya spent several years in the program and seemed once again to thrive. He set out on his own and soon thereafter met Brenda Crossland. Apparently, things clicked well between Vanya and Brenda, and by early 2013, Brenda was pregnant with their first child. Vanya seemed eager at the prospect of becoming a father. When his daughter Elena was born on September 19, 2013, the normally active and hyper Vanya was reportedly stilled beyond words. At that time, Vanya and Brenda lived with Brenda's mother, Candy, along Laneville Road, just west of the Dolly Sods Wilderness area within the Monongahela National Forest. Vanya was unemployed and therefore spent most of his free time at home with his newborn daughter. For the first 7 months, all seemed to be going well. Around March of 2014, both Candy and Brenda noted a distinct change in Vanya's demeanor. He seemed irritable and distant. One evening, after Vanya had been out for several hours, he returned in a far worse state than usual and practically passed out on the front porch. Candy and Brenda helped him inside, but his condition did not improve. Vanya flew into some kind of manic rage and threatened to kill himself. At first, Candy felt that Vanya was just badly intoxicated. However, at one point, Vanya dashed out the front door and proceeded to vault a nearby fence, which was at least 5 feet high. As it turned out, Vanya was not drunk, but high on some kind of drug. Vanya eventually calmed down, and his mania turned back to depression. He lamented that he still felt unloved, and that he would now be forced to leave Candy's home and his daughter behind. Brenda and Candy managed to assuage Vanya's fears of being abandoned, but did insist that he seek immediate help for his obvious issues. The next day, Vanya visited a local clinic. He was diagnosed with depression and placed on medication. Over the next few weeks, the medication seemed to have the desired effect, as Vanya's disposition seemed markedly improved. Unfortunately, Vanya was usually less than trustworthy about taking his prescribed medication, and over the next 2 years, his relationship with Brenda soured until it ultimately came undone. For a while, Vanya had little choice but to live out of his vehicle. Candy Crossland later permitted Vanya to move into a nearby home left to her by her now-deceased parents. Sadly, this too proved futile, as the home soon became a virtual Grand Central Station for drug users and other less than desirable types. Wild partying and rampant drug use became the norm. One day, local authorities showed up with a warrant to search the home, and Candy Crossland felt she had little choice but to insist that Vanya find another place to live. For a time, Vanya moved to Virginia, where a friend helped him find employment. In November of 2015, Brenda contacted Vanya to let him know that he was, again, going to be a father. Vanya returned to West Virginia, and once more, all seemed well for a while. Several weeks after his return, however, Candy Crossland discovered that Vanya had stolen some of her medication. In response to this latest breach of trust, the Crosslands strictly curtailed Vanya's access to their home. Vanya later moved in with Lester and Tammy Mook, a family with whom the Crosslands were acquainted. Vanya's son Jackson was born in July of 2016. By this time, Vanya's relationships with the Crosslands had become strained. According to Vanya, Candy and Brenda were unfairly restricting his access to his children. Neither Candy nor Brenda Crossland have ever denied this, but maintain that they kept Vanya at arm's length because of his unpredictable nature. Finally, in September of 2016, the events which would later culminate in Vanya's death began to unfold. One day, late that month, Candy Crossland was working at a ticket office within the nearby Canaan Valley State Park when she had unexpected visitors. 2 deputies with the Tucker County Sheriff's Department showed up and asked Candy to see if she could identify a man in a photo. The individual in the photo was Vanya, and the deputies advised that he was wanted for questioning in connection with a series of brazen daylight burglaries in the Canaan Valley area. Vanya had apparently become involved with the individuals responsible for these home burglaries, and on one occasion had been caught in the act by friends of the home's owners. About this same time, Vanya left for North Carolina with his friend Ryan Vanover to attend a concert in Charlotte. In a recent series of Facebook posts, Ryan has recalled that he picked Vanya up at the Mook's residence on September 29, 2016, and returned him to the same residence on October 2nd. The following day, October 3rd, Vanya turned 25 years old. 2 days later, on October 5th, Vanya sent a text message to Brenda and asked if he could accompany her and the children for trick-or-treating later that month. Brenda stated that Vanya may well be in prison by that time. Vanya is said to have replied that he was going to get things worked out with the authorities. By all accounts, this was the last known contact with Vanya Perlis. Days passed, and then weeks with no word from Vanya. At first, little if any concern was evinced, as it was not uncommon for Vanya to disappear for short periods of time. As one might expect, many locals theorized that Vanya was simply laying low while authorities were seeking to question him. It should be noted at this point that no arrest warrant for Vanya Perlis was ever issued by either the Tucker County Sheriff's Department or the West Virginia State Police. As far as anyone knows, authorities were looking to question Vanya about the rash of burglaries and not necessarily to take him into custody. No charges of burglary or breaking and entering were ever filed. As October turned into November, Vanya's friends and family grew more concerned. They did not think it likely that Vanya would have remained incommunicado for so long, even if he were attempting to duck the questions of law enforcement. On November 12, 2016, their beliefs would be proven accurate. Late that night, on the Grant County side of the Dolly Sods Wilderness, a pair of hunters came upon the lifeless body of Vanya Perlis. Troopers from the Moorfield Detachment of the West Virginia State Police responded to the grisly scene. Vanya's remains were found at the base of an uprooted tree about 60 feet away from a narrow roadway which traverses the Dolly Sods Wilderness area. It was painfully evident that he had been there for quite some time and that his death had been no accident. Vanya was found dressed in a pair of blue jeans and a t-shirt covered by a hooded sweatshirt. A pair of brown Cabela brand shoes and a belt were also recovered, along with Vanya's wallet and ID. Time in the elements had taken their toll as the remains were found to be partially skeletonized. The mandible had become separated from the skull, and both hands were missing, likely the result of post-mortem animal activity. The overall condition of the remains made immediate visual identification impossible. Vanya's clothing and remains were transported to the office of the chief medical examiner in Charleston for an autopsy. During the examination, it was determined that death had occurred from 3 gunshot wounds to the rear of the skull. While the caliber and make have never been made public, 5 deformed bullet fragments were recovered from inside the cranial area. Based upon the injuries observed, the medical examiner concluded that Vanya had been shot 3 times, and that each shot was a back-to-front type injury with no exit wounds. Also, it was determined that death had occurred sometime in early October. The last known contact with Vanya Perlis was on October 5th. The medical examiner's report indicates that the manner of death was ruled a homicide on November 14, 2016. However, this fact was not made public until March of 2018, 15 months after the initial determination had been made. The reason for the delay in the release of this information is not known. Vanya's remains were found here, roughly 60 feet east of a hairpin turn on Forest Route 19 in the Dolly Sods Wilderness. This location is approximately 7 miles away from the residence along Laneville Road where Vanya was living prior to his death. However, the location is also only about 1 mile away from the Grant County entrance gate, which opens onto Jordan Run Road. Within the boundaries of the Dolly Sods Wilderness, Forest Route 19 is a narrow, unimproved gravel roadway which mainly provides vehicular access to several of the many hiking trails and scenic overlooks available for public use. From the side of Forest Route 19, the location where Vanya's body was found can be seen, although the indentation caused by the nearby felled tree may have served to shield it from view. Based on the evidence found at the scene, authorities feel certain that Vanya's body was at the location where it was found for at least 6 weeks, and most likely since October 5th. Despite the rugged nature of the forest road, the time period when authorities believe Vanya was murdered can often correspond with the seasonal changing of the leaves, an event which usually draws in another influx of nature lovers and photographers. Hardly an ideal location or time to commit a murder or even hide a body. Could Vanya's killers have been familiar enough with the area to feel comfortable in hiding his body in a location that is not entirely remote? Just how and why did Vanya end up where he was found? Authorities have never publicly stated whether or not they think Vanya was killed where his body was found, or if they feel he was killed elsewhere and his body later transported to the Dolly Sods location. As one might expect in such a close-knit rural community, rumors about what led to Vanya's death were soon flying. What follows is mostly educated conjecture that has been discussed over the last 3 years. Many local residents felt that Vanya simply had fallen victim to the high-risk lifestyle he was known to be living, a lifestyle that is known to have included drugs and possible involvement in a local theft ring. Like much of the mountain state, increased drug use and the rise in crime which often follows in its wake had not bypassed the Potomac Highlands. In the months leading up to and following Vanya's death, the series of home-stripping burglaries continued, at least one of them occurring less than a mile from Candy Crossland's place of employment. Had Vanya simply fallen in with the proverbial bad crowd and somehow paid with his life? Other, more ominous rumors also crept up. Some theorized that Vanya had fallen in with a bad crowd, but that his death was not a result of any alleged criminal activity, but because he planned to reveal the facts about his activity to the authorities. Vanya's last known communicated words, delivered via text message, indicated that he intended to, quote, work things out with the police. Was Vanya possibly planning to turn himself in and implicate others? If so, who, and for what? There seemed to be no end to the guessing game. On the most absurd end of the spectrum, some even went so far as to speculate that Vanya's murder had been planned and carried out by members of the Russian mafia, an allegation which might seem comical were the circumstances not so intensely serious. Even worse, however, were the words from those whose one true emotion was apathy, individuals who have gone so far as to state that Vanya's death was meaningless, as he was already a lost cause. Frustration, speculation, and ludicrous theories aside, the investigation into the death of Vanya Perlis has not stood still. Roughly 1 year later, it appeared that authorities were on the verge of making an arrest. Evidence gathered up to that point was turned over to the prosecutor's office, and things looked promising. Indeed, the prosecutor advised Candy Crossland that an arrest was imminent. It was not to be. For whatever reason, no indictment was brought, and the case has never again been brought before the prosecutor's office. This turn of events is made all the more frustrating by the fact that law enforcement have made no secret that they have a suspect or suspects in mind in Vanya's murder, and because so many in the community also feel that they know the identity of the killers, but are afraid to speak out until he, she, or they are safely behind bars. As is often the case, we cannot, for legal reasons, reveal the name or names that so often surface in this case. We can only assure you that the names are known to law enforcement, who continue their investigation and their efforts to build a solid case. Despite the occasional setbacks, Vanya's friends and family remain firmly dedicated to bringing his killer or killers to justice. They, too, have their own theories about what happened that day in October 2016, and have made their evidence and suspicions known to the West Virginia State Police. In 2018, Crime Stoppers of West Virginia joined in the effort to find Vanya's killers. Now, anyone with direct information or even suspicions may make them known in a completely anonymous fashion.
As with so many unsolved homicides, a resolution to the murder of Vanya Perlis may hinge on one key bit of information. That one missing piece to the puzzle which will help to make the overall picture complete. And Vanya's friends and family are convinced that they are close. However, as thus far no one has been convicted or even indicted for Vanya's murder, any suspects, named or unnamed, must continue to be presumed innocent. Authorities would be very interested in speaking with anyone who may have seen or spoken with Vanya on or possibly after October 5th, 2016. There is just a chance that you yourself may be able to help. Please pay close attention to the following summation.
Ivan Vanya Perlis was last known to have been alive on Wednesday, October 5th, 2016. That day, he communicated by text message with Brenda Crossland. Vanya reportedly stated that he planned to contact the Tucker County, West Virginia Sheriff's Department. About 1 week previous, Vanya had been sought out by authorities for questioning in connection with a series of home burglaries in the Laneville area. Vanya had been observed leaving a residence when friends of the home's owner showed up unexpectedly. Furniture inside of this home had been moved to an area near the front door, apparently prepped for later removal. The extent of Vanya's role in this house-stripping ring is not known, but no charges were ever filed. Authorities think it is likely that Vanya was killed on or very near to October 5, 2016. They have never publicly speculated about a possible motive, although several acquaintances think his death must have been connected either to the house-stripping burglaries or drugs. They also think it unlikely that Vanya was killed where his body was later found. Vanya's remains were found about 60 feet east of Forest Route 19, about 1 mile from the Grant County entrance to the Dolly Sods Wilderness in the Monongahela National Forest. His body was badly decomposed and his hands were missing. His remains were clad in a pair of blue jeans, a t-shirt, a hooded sweatshirt, one white sock, a belt, and a pair of brown Cabela brand shoes. Vanya Perlis had been shot 3 times in the back of the head. The chief medical examiner fixed the date of Vanya's death between October 3rd and October 5th. Vanya's friends and family think it is likely that he knew his killer or killers, and that he, she, or they were local residents. If you have any information concerning the murder of Vanya Perlis, please contact Trooper Benjamin Thorne with the West Virginia State Police at 304-538-2925.